A lot of fish keepers out there are going to tell you that if you keep American cichlids with African cichlids, then you're committing the unpardonable sin. Super controversial. But is it actually true? Well, let's talk about it. If you're thinking about doing this, you're going to hear some people say that it's something you should never do, it's going to end with dead fish everywhere, and then you'll find other people saying that they've done it for years and there have been no problems at all. So which is true? Well, if you're considering doing this, let's go over some of the things that you need to consider before you commit this unpardonable sin.
I have to fall apart to get to see you again. You only have a heart when mine is bleeding, some kind of friend.
I've had these 3 female African cichlid assassins in this old 55-gallon grow-out quarantine tank for quite a while now. But I've also had other male African cichlids in here along with some various other American cichlids. I haven't had any really big Americans in here because of the size of the tank, but would I put one in here if I needed to? Yeah, I would, depending on several factors and if it was temporary or not. And I'm going to look at all the things you should consider before doing this. The first and most obvious one, of course, is aggression levels. How aggressive are the fish you're going to keep together? If you have some Americans and Africans with similar aggression levels, then things are going to be a lot easier for everyone. Can you keep more aggressive fish with less aggressive fish? Well, sometimes, yeah. But let's say you do something like add a Texas cichlid like Kevin here with some less aggressive Africans like a redfin borlei or a Turkish peacock. While any combo can fail because of aggression, if you're doing this kind of stocking, then you're pretty much inviting a nightmare into your tank. You want to keep the aggression at about the same level. If you're going to combine Americans with Africans, and this really goes with combining any cichlids together, you don't want to have ultra psychos with mild psychos. Kind of go middle of the road with everyone. Maybe try an Oscar. Oscars tend to be on the less aggressive side, so try an Oscar with some milder Africans. You might be wondering about Mbuna. This is Attica, my 75-gallon Mbuna tank. I'll be switching gears on the stocking in this tank sometime here in the near future, hopefully. But Mbuna are going to be on the more aggressive side, and they could really terrorize your Americans and other Africans. But would I try a yellow lab Mbuna with my Americans? Yep. I've done it with my peas and haps and Alcatraz with no problems at all. Yellow labs are pretty mild. Just use your judgment and do your research. Know what you're going to do and consider the possible outcomes. Be watching, because you have to be ready if the shit hits the fan.
Subscribe, or someone dies. Ding ding.
If you're thinking of mixing American cichlids with African cichlids, then you're going to have the right setup for them, so they both can thrive together. The smaller your tank is, the more problems you're likely to have, and vice versa, the bigger your tank is, the fewer problems you're probably going to have.
Yeah, if I was going to do this, I probably wouldn't try it with a 55-gallon tank. Oh wait, that's exactly what I'm doing, isn't it? Okay, let me rephrase that. If I was going to do this long-term with some full-grown larger fish, I wouldn't try it in a 55. I'm doing it with a few female Africans and some very small to middle-sized Americans. But I still have to watch because those little guys can get aggressive and pick at the calmer fish in here like the Jarapari. This isn't a setup I'd keep long-term. I'm just growing out the Americans to add to San Quentin. Now, would I add some Africans from Alcatraz into San Quentin? Well, that's a different story. San Quentin is huge, and there's a lot of space in there to keep away from each other. I would feel pretty okay about doing that. I'd be selective about who I'm adding, of course, like we just talked about. I wouldn't put Blind Bart, for instance, my Strigatus, in there. He's pretty aggressive and unpredictable, so I'd just be setting myself up to fail. But I would add some guys like Uri, my Blue Dolphin, and Saturn, my Mdoka White Lips. I actually think they do quite well in there. The extra room the tank has to offer is pretty important if you're going to do this. You don't need to have a 435-gallon for most situations, but probably more than a 75 unless you're going to have some really peaceful smaller guys in there together. Okay, but why don't I do it then? Add some Africans to San Quentin. Well, I don't need to. If I needed to, I probably would. But I think it's a better idea to keep Americans with Americans and Africans with Africans. For one thing, it's going to remove the mystery about how they're going to get along together. But also, they don't live with each other in nature, and there's an obvious difference in aesthetics between the two. So I prefer to keep them separate, if for nothing else, the way the tank looks. I'm going for a certain vibe in my tanks, and having a bunch of peas and haps in San Quentin would kill the vibe for me. Just doesn't look great. But maybe you think it would look awesome, so you could very well give it a go. But keep in mind the scape of the tank too. Some Africans like it pretty wide open, and Americans like a lot of natural decor to swim through. Not a deal breaker probably, but something to consider for sure.
I learned this trick a long time ago when I was adding fish to my African cichlid tank Alcatraz over here. But it's a trick that should work in a lot of situations, including when you're mixing American cichlids with African cichlids.
I've done this a ton of times now, and it's made my life as a fish keeper, a cichlid keeper, immeasurably more relaxing. Adding fish to an existing tank used to be a complete nightmare because I'd always be afraid the existing nut jobs would just rip the new guys apart. Of course, you're always adding in groups of 3 or more, which helps. But what helps even more is if you add them when they're much smaller than the current inmates. Not bite-sized, mind you, but not a threat either. They just get overlooked. That's what I did here with my African cichlid shipment from Andre Pitre. Added a bunch of 3-inchers to the big boys in Alcatraz. You'd think they'd get annihilated immediately, but absolutely no one gave a fuck. So you might be wise to do the same if you're going to keep Americans with Africans. If you have a 6-inch Oscar, it might be wise to add your Red Empress African cichlid at about 3 inches or so. That way your Oscar won't think of him as a threat. Sure, it might not be a problem even if they are the same size. But I'm saying it might, and you want to do everything you can to keep the aggression down, or you'll regret it. I already mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again. I'd also keep away from adding extremely aggressive species if you're going to be mixing Americans with Africans. Know your species and their general characteristics. Don't try mixing a Venustus or any Mbuna with a Texas cichlid. I wouldn't try this with a flower horn. I wouldn't try it with a Midas cichlid. I wouldn't try it with an eye biter. Keep it to the less nutjobby types, and everyone's going to have a much higher chance of staying nice and healthy and alive.
We're all good fish keepers here, so we feed our fish great food, right? But what if you mix American cichlids with African cichlids? They can have different dietary needs. So if you're doing that, what are you going to feed them then?
Peacocks and haps just love a high protein diet. I feed them all kinds of Northfin pellets that give them lots of protein. Great food. Now I do have a yellow lab and Mbuna in Alcatraz with those peacocks and haps, so I mix some Northfin veggie pellets as well because Mbuna like a more plant-based diet. You can be much more lenient with the diet of yellow labs, but with most other Mbuna you need to get much less protein and a lot more veggies. So I do put some veggie pellets in with my concoction for the Africans. It's mostly the meatier types of pellets, but I make sure there's enough veggie in there to keep everyone happy. Same thing with all my Americans and my mixed tank. The 55-gallon has all Americans along with the female assassin Africans. I feed them a 50-50 mix that's made again by Northfin. It comes mixed already, so that's pretty cool. You can also target feed if you have a fish or two with special dietary needs. Getting them to hand feed is a good way to do it if you can manage that. If you have a fish that's exclusively an herbivore, then I probably wouldn't try this as they could get a hold of too much protein and that could be the end of them.
I can remember back to when I was pretty much still sane. I only had one community tank, I had no cichlids at all, and man did I have a lot to learn. I still do, but I mean back then it was a lot to learn. But I remember being really worried about pH and what it was going to do to my fish if it was the wrong pH. And maybe looking back, I was a little too worried about it.
Sprung grass, lungs breathing in the darkness, low down low, scattered in the ground, vapor escapes us in thin air.
I used to always hear about how important the right pH was, and if a fish died, it was probably because the pH was too far out of their preferred range. If a fish likes a pH of 7.0, don't put it in a tank with a pH of 8.2. Well, here's something I've discovered over time. Most of these inmates simply adjust. Yeah, just take a look at San Quentin, for example. Lots of these guys like a pH of 7.5 or lower, but this tank is sitting at about 8.2 to 8.4, and it's hard water. Super high like the African cichlids enjoy. In fact, all my tanks are high like that, but everyone's doing fine. You might have to be more careful with certain species like discus and other wild-caught species that have a harder time adjusting to a different pH than the one they're used to. But if you're buying your fish from the store or a breeder and they're not wild-caught and you're not trying to breed them, they'll probably be just fine as long as your parameters aren't really extreme. But you know, Percy, my wild-caught Colombian Oscar, is doing great in this very alkaline tank. Everyone is. Is it preferred to have every fish in a tank with their ideal pH and water hardness range? Yeah, but who does that? And so far, in my experience, it's worked out just fine, not worrying about it.
Putting your American cichlids with your African cichlids might work out okay, but it might not. So you need to be prepared and have a course of action if shit goes down in your tank. If you don't do what I'm going to talk about in this next section, then you'd better just keep your American cichlids separate from your African cichlids.
So hard to see from the moment we arrive.
If you have one tank in your home, and that's it, then I probably wouldn't try this. Mixing American cichlids and African cichlids is sketchy. You can do all your research and know your fish before you add them, but you know, most cichlids tend to be at the upper end of the psycho scale, even many of the more mild ones, and just dumping them all together in one tank and saying, "There you go, little guys. I hope it all works out, because if it doesn't,
You're all gonna die.
isn't going to pan out too well for anyone. But that might be what happens if you don't have a backup plan. You'll need to have another prison tank where you can put an inmate who might not quite have fit in with the other natives. These fish can all turn crazy on a dime and want everyone, or one specific inmate, dead. You got to be able to react and get them out of there. You know, this really goes with keeping cichlids in general. You need to have a backup system in place so you can get a fish out of immediate danger if things go south. For me, it's mostly my 55 gallon. If someone's getting their ass beat in Alcatraz, and it's not just a quick little fight and it's over, I move one of the fish, either the aggressor or the target, in there for a bit, and maybe permanently depending on the situation. Or I can move someone from San Quentin over to the 180 or again the 55. The point is, I have options. And so do you with your time. And you still chose to watch this. And for that, I thank you.
If you enjoy these videos, consider becoming a member. It's a great way to support the channel, and you get extra perks like being able to watch the videos a day or two early and getting your name included in the videos. Just hit the join button right below. And until next time, that's going to be a wrap.